Hello and welcome to cafetography.co.uk. Today we're looking at another of Sigma's latest lenses, the 30mm f1.4 DC Art. This is the long-awaited update to Sigma's original 30mm f1.4 lens, which has been around for a very long time now. This is a very attractive lens for a lot of reasons. The 30mm focal length is very versatile. It's wide enough to get the bigger picture, but zoomed in enough to give you a good separation between your subject and the background. But the main attraction to this lens is its very fast f1.4 maximum aperture. That means this lens lets in a very impressive amount of light, up to 8 times more than a standard kit lens does at 30mm. So it can be a lot of fun to use at night time or in any darker situation. That very wide maximum aperture can also give you a very out of focus background, as you can see here, which opens up all kinds of creative possibilities and gives your pictures a nice sense of depth. This lens is designed for APS-C digital cameras, where 30mm is a very useful, standard focal length, neither wide angle nor telephoto. Interestingly though, the lens will mount on a full frame camera. You're not meant to, but it still works. This footage was taken on a Canon 6D. At f1.4 you see some strong vignetting, but the whole image circle is covered. If you stop the lens down to f2.8, then the vignetting goes away. So in an emergency you can still mount this lens on a full frame camera, but it really is best to use it on APS-C. Let's look at the lens's build quality. It's nice and compact, while still feeling quite solid and weighty in your hand. Sigma's new lens designs really are attractive, even with the lens's unusually wide lens hood attached. Strangely, for such a fast lens, the front element is really quite small, which looks a little odd. The focus ring turns smoothly with just the right amount of resistance. It's not damped amazingly well though, so very precise focusing can be a tiny bit tricky. The lens does have full-time manual focus, so you can change focus anytime you like. The autofocus motor is reasonably fast and very quiet, as you can see here. In testing, the focus accuracy was generally good, but it would miss slightly from time to time. Overall, the lens is built very nicely indeed, and it works perfectly well. The fact that it looks the part is also a nice bonus. Let's take a look at image quality. The previous, non-art version of this lens really struggled to give sharp images, so it should be interesting to see if Sigma have improved things. We'll test it out on an 18-megapixel Canon 60D. With the aperture wide open at f1.4, the sharpness in the middle of the frame is actually very good, and we also see fairly good levels of contrast. When we look into the corners, sharpness noticeably drops, but the image quality is still holding up fairly well. The only real disappointment is high levels of chromatic aberration, or colours on contrasting edges. You can see them most clearly on this lettering. That really is much stronger than usual, so it's a real slip-up. But overall, for an aperture of f1.4, it's not a bad performance and it's much better than its predecessor. Stop the lens down to f2 and it's a little sharper in the corners, and stop down to f4 for very good levels of corner sharpness. However, the chromatic aberrations, while reduced, are still noticeable, although thankfully you don't see them in the middle of the frame, where image resolution has become extremely high. So overall, this lens gives a good performance. It's very sharp in the middle, and the corners are reasonably good, although it takes quite a lot of stopping the lens down before they get really sharp. The high levels of chromatic aberration are definitely a disappointment, but at least they can be gotten rid of using photo editing software. Well, let's take a look at vignetting and distortion levels. In our test chart, we can see that the lens exhibits a little barrel distortion, but it's nothing to really panic about. At f1.4, there is some vignetting, or darkness in the corners, but thankfully it's not too pronounced, which is surprising considering the lens's very small front element. Stop the lens down to f2 and it's no longer really noticeable, so it's actually a reasonably good performance for vignetting and distortion. The lens can focus decently close to your subjects, which is good to see on a wider angle lens. Here you can see that at f1.4 the close-up picture quality is reasonable, but there is some ghosting to be seen. All you have to do is top down to f2 and the picture becomes very sharp again. A good performance. More good news is that the lens works reasonably well against bright lights, as you can see in this footage. You get a little bit of flaring, but there's no real lack of contrast, so it's a fairly good showing. Another good thing is that the lens has very attractive bokeh, or good quality backgrounds. As you can see here, the blurriness in the backgrounds is very smooth and non-distracting. That's an essential quality for a lens of this kind, as you'll want to be getting lots of pictures at f1.4. On a related note, however, the lens does struggle a bit with longitudinal chromatic aberration, or colourful bokeh highlights. As you can see here, the outer focus highlights are quite colourfully tinted. They're only just beginning to go away at f2.8, so that is a slight annoyance, but then again, it's a fairly typical issue for any fast aperture lens. But overall, this is a very enjoyable lens to use and it has lots to commend it. It's plenty sharp enough for most people, it has very nice bokeh, it's small and built very nicely, and it's fairly good value for money. The only real letdown is the huge amount of chromatic aberration it exhibits, and the autofocus isn't always perfect. But for a lens at this price point, you can't demand perfection, and if you do need that, then you can always check out this lens's bigger brother, the Sigma 35mm f1.4, which gives even better picture quality, but costs a lot more. But at the end of the day, the Sigma 30mm DC Art is a very good value lens, which could get tons of use on anyone's camera. It's not perfect, but it'll be more than enough for most photographers who want a bit more fun out of their digital SLR.